In this video, I'm going to go over everything I read in the month of September 2023. I'm also going to talk about what I think was my book of the month, and then do something a little different and try to go over a TBR for next month since it's October and we're going into spooky season. So let's just get right into it. The first book I finished in September was They'd Rather Be Right by Mark Clifton and Frank Riley. And this is part of the series I'm doing. This is one of the books. What's really cool was when I did that video, I got a comment from someone whose great-grandfather was Mark Clifton. And I'll put it right here so you can see it, or you can go to the video and check it out. But I thought that was really cool, kind of interesting what they stated. You know, this book is kind of considered one of the books that should have never won a Hugo Award. I didn't think it was that bad, but compared to all the other books that are on the list, maybe it's not quite as strong. But overall, I thought the book was interesting, came up with some good ideas. It's very short too. And then the next book I finished was Falling Free by Lois McMaster Bujold. And this is kind of a standalone that's within her big kind of universe that she writes in, the Vorkosian saga. And I really like this. It really turned me on to her writing, her style, kind of it doesn't really take place. It's like 200 years before most of the other books, so it could be read completely on its own. And while I haven't read the other series, from the advice I've gotten from people that have said this is a pretty good place to start if you want to, without kind of committing to the whole storyline and plot of the kind of the bigger series. But after reading that, I definitely want to get into the books that mostly deal with Miles, one of the main characters in this series. He sounds real interesting and just kind of an interesting series in general. And then I read another book that was on, a lot of these were on the list that I'm doing in this series. This one was Mortal Gods by Jonathan Fast. And this was one of the lowest rated and like least amount of reviews on Goodreads, just very obscure. And the plot and ideas were really good. The cover is really good, and it's super short, but the writing was hard to get over. It's hard for me to recommend it to many people. It just kind of had a weird, almost juvenile sexual overtone throughout the book that just didn't do it for me. But other than that, it was a really good book. Then I didn't really read these, but I'd been listening over the last month or so. I'd been kind of revisiting these Edgar Rice Burroughs books because they are on the list. I'd read them before. I didn't really want to dedicate the time to actually physically rereading them. And so I listened to A Princess of Mars, At the Earth's Core, and Tarzan on audiobook. And I highly recommend it. The audiobook versions of these books were great. Like I mentioned in the review, these books are pretty straightforward. There's not huge cast of characters and intertwining character arcs and all this stuff to kind of keep your attention on. And I usually don't do audiobooks for fiction unless I've already read it. But I feel like you could even, if you struggle with audiobooks, give them a shot, because the way they are written and how they were adapted into audiobook was just great as far as I'm concerned. And then I read A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, and this was one I've been wanting to read for a really long time. Really liked it. It's a big one. It's over 600 pages, and it won the Hugo Award. I'm glad I read it. There's some other books in this series that I'll be reading eventually because I really enjoyed it a lot. Then the next book I read was This Is the Way the World Ends by James Morrow. And I put a lot of high expectations on this book because it was considered post-apocalyptic and because a lot of people liken James Morrow to Kurt Vonnegut. And I really enjoyed it. It's very absurd. It's got a lot of dark humor, weird humor, satire. You can go, all these books you can go back and watch my reviews on. It didn't quite live up to the hype I put on it, but I gotta understand that that was just me. It was overall a really good book and I liked it. And then the last book, or I'm considering it one book, but it was really two books, The Lost World and The Poison Belt by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And I have this, both of these books were on the list. I have this version that has both of them in here. Combined, it's like 250 pages because The Poison Belt was only like 70 pages or something. And I really enjoyed these. They were great. You don't hear a lot about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle with his science fiction. Most people talk about his other works, mostly Sherlock Holmes. But wow, it kind of blew me away. It was a lot of fun, and it was good. But for my book of the month, I'm gonna have to give it to A Fire Upon the Deep. It's just the world building. The characters were pretty good, but the whole universe, this idea of the zones of thought were really original. And then the attention to detail in the alien species and how truly alien they seem is what did it for me. So that's my book of the month. And then normally, like I said, I'm a mood reader and I don't like to kind of announce a TBR, but I'm going to give this one a shot and see how it goes. We're going into spooky season. I'm going to read a few books that kind of, some are considered horror, some kind of blend a couple genres. But the first one I'm going to read, and I'm going to start on this right away, is Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. And I've got this really cool, it's one of my, I don't know, it might be one of my favorite horror copies I have. And it's in just perfect condition. It's got one of these covers. Forget what the exact name of those types of covers are. It's a little bit bigger, but I think these kind of books read pretty quick. So I'm gonna start with that. And then another book, I don't know which order after that, but Ira Levin, Rosemary's Baby. This is on the list of masterpieces of science fiction, the series I'm doing. Not really sure it is science fiction. Tarzan was on that list. It doesn't really matter. I want to read this, and I'm going to be reading that. And then I've got, now this doesn't really fall under horror or anything like that, but it's The Iron Dream by Norman Spinrad. I've only read one other book by Norman Spinrad. It was very interesting. It was The Void Captain's Tale. And this one, just the premise of it sounds pretty interesting. Had couple of people comment on a book haul that they're interested to see what I think about it, and I am too, so gonna give that one a go. And then this last one that I'm gonna attempt to read, we'll see how I feel. I might have horror overload, or I might not just be in the mood, but if I get through those, I might try to get through the Tommyknockers by Stephen King. This is known by a lot of people as probably the worst book Stephen King ever wrote. I have not read it. I've read about 2/3 of what Stephen King has written. And it kind of falls in science fiction, horror, whatever. And I'm going to give it a go if I get time to, or if I feel like it. And then also, in between these kind of bigger books, I might still throw in some shorter science fiction just to mix things up, because depending on how the month goes, I should be able to get through those and maybe another book or two. We'll just have to see. So that's it for the month of September. It was a good month by my standards. Some books weren't my favorite, but they're all interesting, and I had some really good books this month too. And hoping next month is the same. So let me know what you're reading next month or what you read this month, and we'll see you in the next video.